The opening strikes immediately with the core truth that most people never realize. Every single day, from the moment they wake until they collapse into sleep, a war is raging inside their skull, and they don't even know they're soldiers. This isn't metaphor. This is reality. The battlefield is your mind. And right now, as you hear these words, there are thoughts firing like bullets, memories detonating like landmines, fears advancing like enemy troops. And you've been losing ground for so long, you've forgotten what victory even looks like. The exhaustion you feel isn't just tiredness, it's battle fatigue from fighting invisible enemies that never sleep, never retreat, never negotiate. You wake up and immediately the assault begins. The voice whispering you're not enough ambushes you before breakfast. The anxiety about tomorrow attacks while you're trying to focus on today. The regret about yesterday occupies your mind like hostile territory you can't reclaim. Most people surrender without firing a single shot because they don't realize the fight is even happening. They think the negative thoughts are just who they are. They believe the fear is just being realistic. They accept the depression as just how life is, never understanding that these are invaders, not inhabitants, enemies disguised as truth. The pain points emerge like wounds being cataloged after battle. There's the confusion of not knowing which thoughts are actually yours and which were planted by trauma, by rejection, by the people who hurt you and left their poison in your perception. There's the specific torture of fighting the same battle every single day. You win a small victory over insecurity in the morning, and by evening, it's recaptured that ground and brought reinforcements. You try to think positive, but it feels like showing up to a gunfight with a tambourine, completely outmatched, completely unprepared for the savagery of your own mind turning against you. The loneliness hits different when you realize you can't even trust your own thoughts, when your mind feels less like home and more like occupied territory, when the voice in your head sounds more like your worst enemy than your best friend. There's the exhaustion of people telling you to just think better thoughts as if you haven't been trying, as if you're not already bleeding out from the effort, as if positive thinking could stop an artillery barrage of panic attacks and intrusive thoughts. Then there's the revelation that breaks most people. The realization that you've been fighting on the wrong battlefield entirely, wasting ammunition on battles that don't matter while the real war happens in territory you didn't even know existed. You've been fighting your circumstances when the real enemy is your perception of those circumstances. You've been fighting other people when the real enemy is the version of their voice you've internalized and given authority in your own head. You've been fighting your past when the real enemy is your inability to stop letting your past dictate your present. The rejection you experienced years ago still has a seat at the table of your decision making. The failure you endured still gets a vote on whether you try again. The person who abandoned you still gets to write the script for how you see yourself. This is the cruelty of mental warfare. The battles don't end when the external threat leaves. They continue as long as you let the memory of that threat occupy space in your mind. The emptiness, the feeling of being lost, the sense that you're wandering through life without direction. These aren't character flaws. They're symptoms of a mind under siege, a consciousness that's been so bombarded with contradictory messages, so invaded by other people's opinions and expectations, so colonized by fear and doubt that you can't hear your own voice anymore. You're not weak for struggling. You're not broken for feeling overwhelmed. You're a soldier who's been in combat so long you forgot there was ever peace. The approval seeking, the people pleasing, the constant second guessing. These are defense mechanisms from a mind that learned the battlefield was safer when you made yourself small, when you didn't challenge the enemy, when you surrendered territory to keep the peace. But here's what nobody tells you about surrendering in mental warfare. The enemy doesn't stop when you wave the white flag. They just take more ground, demand more tribute, occupy more of who you were meant to be. And the precious, irreplaceable time you've wasted fighting battles in your head instead of building empires in reality, rehearsing conversations that will never happen, preparing for rejections that haven't occurred, defending yourself against accusations nobody made. This is the hidden cost of losing the mental war. While your mind was at war with itself, your potential was sitting idle, your purpose was waiting for orders that never came, your destiny was losing patience with a general who couldn't even command his own thoughts. The broken identity, the shattered sense of self, the feeling that you don't even know who you are anymore. This happens when you let the enemy rewrite your story, when you accept their version of you as truth, when you start believing the propaganda your own mind generates about your worth, your capability, your right to take up space in this world. But here's where the turn begins, where the counteroffensive starts to form. The very fact that you're still here, still listening, still searching for answers means you haven't completely surrendered. There's still a part of you that knows this isn't how the story ends. Something in you recognizes that these thoughts tormenting you aren't the final authority. These feelings drowning you aren't the ocean. This confusion consuming you isn't your permanent address. You're tired, yes. You're wounded, absolutely. You're outgunned and outmaneuvered, and you've lost more battles than you've won. But you're still breathing, still fighting, still showing up to a war most people don't even acknowledge exists. And that stubborn refusal to die, even when your own mind is trying to kill you, that's the first sign that you were built for this. That you're not just a soldier in this war, you're the one who's going to win it. Before you can win any war, you have to understand the battlefield, and your mind is the most complex terrain you'll ever navigate. It's got valleys where depression pools like stagnant water, mountains where anxiety builds into avalanches, forests where memories grow so thick you can't see the path forward, and deserts where hope dries up and you wander in circles convinced you're making progress. A soldier who doesn't know the terrain fights blind, swinging at shadows, exhausting himself on the wrong hills while the real battle happens elsewhere. A gardener who doesn't understand soil will plant seeds that never break through, watering ground that can't sustain life, wondering why nothing grows when the problem isn't the seed. It's that he's trying to cultivate concrete. A king who doesn't map his kingdom before defending it will send troops to borders that don't need protection while invaders walk through unguarded gates. And you've been doing this defending against threats that aren't coming while real enemies slip past your awareness and set up camp in your subconscious. Your mind is sacred ground. Understand this first and deeply. It was never meant to be a war zone. It was designed to be a garden, a kingdom, a sanctuary where truth grows and wisdom is cultivated, and you commune with the deepest parts of who you actually are. But it's been invaded, colonized, occupied by lies that have lived there so long they've convinced you they're native to the soil, that they belong there, that they're part of the landscape. The belief that you're not enough, that's not indigenous to your mind, that was imported, brought in by someone who needed you small to feel big themselves. The fear that you'll always be alone, that's not original equipment, that was installed by rejection, by abandonment, by someone leaving in your mind trying to protect you by making you expect it from everyone. The anxiety about the future, that's not natural climate, that's pollution, smog from overthinking, toxic runoff from trauma that your mind hasn't processed. So it just keeps recycling the poison. Here's where the wisdom cuts deep. You have to learn to recognize which thoughts are actually yours and which ones are just echoes. Repetitions, recordings playing on loop from battles you've already survived. There's a story of a craftsman, a man who spent his life sharpening blades. And people would ask him how he knew when a blade was truly sharp. And he'd say, you have to test it. You have to see what it cuts through and what it gets stuck on. And he applied this same principle to his thoughts. Every morning he would examine his thoughts like blades on a whetstone. Does this thought cut toward my purpose, or does it only wound me? Does this belief slice through obstacles, or does it get stuck in self-pity? Does this fear sharpen my awareness, or does it just make me bleed? And he learned over years of this practice that most of the thoughts occupying his mind were dull blades, useless weapons he'd been carrying out of habit, beliefs that couldn't cut through anything except his own confidence, fears that couldn't protect him from anything except his own progress. The lion cub doesn't know it's a lion by being told, it knows by instinct. But even instinct has to be trained. The cub has to learn which impulses lead to food and which lead to danger, which roars command respect and which just waste breath, which fights to pick and which to walk away from. You've got instincts too. Deep knowing that tries to surface. Intuition that whispers truth before your overthinking drowns it out. Gut feelings that point toward your path before fear talks you into a detour. But you've been taught to ignore these, to second guess your own internal compass, to trust everyone's opinion except the one that matters most, your own. The mental battlefield gets even more chaotic when you're not just fighting external enemies, but also fighting against your own inner knowing. When you're at war with the very instincts that are trying to save you. When you're suppressing the truth, your soul is screaming because it doesn't match what other people said. You should want, should be, should pursue. There's this other story, rarely told but universally experienced. A person so lost in the chaos of mental warfare that they couldn't distinguish between the battle and their identity. They thought the war was who they were. The struggle was their personality. The pain was their purpose. They fought every day but never questioned what they were fighting for. Never stopped to ask if the enemy they were engaging was even real or just a phantom constructed from past hurts and future fears. And then one day, in a moment of exhausted clarity, they realized they'd been fighting on the wrong battlefield. Entirely, they'd been fighting symptoms instead of sources, battling the anxiety instead of addressing the unprocessed trauma, feeding it, wrestling with depression instead of confronting the unexpressed grief underneath it, trying to defeat loneliness instead of healing the rejection wound that made them believe they were unworthy of connection. The whole war shifted when they finally understood the terrain, when they stopped fighting what they could see and started addressing what they couldn't, when they went deeper than surface, thoughts into the root systems, where beliefs grow. The seed metaphor becomes crucial here, but not in the way you've heard it before. A seed buried in darkness has two options. It either rots from the moisture and pressure, or it roots from that exact same moisture and pressure, and the only difference is whether it's designed for that soil. You've been buried, yes, buried under expectations, under disappointments, under trauma, under the weight of trying to be everything to everyone while disappearing to yourself. The darkness you're in, the pressure you're under, the isolation you're feeling, this is either rotting you or rooting you, and the difference isn't the circumstances, it's whether you're designed for this depth, whether you were built to transform burial into breakthrough. And here's the truth you need to sear into your consciousness. You wouldn't be in this soil if you weren't designed to grow through it. You wouldn't face this specific pressure if you weren't meant to root at this specific depth. You wouldn't experience this particular darkness if there wasn't something in you that only activates under these exact conditions. The seasons of mental warfare teach you timing. There are seasons to fight, seasons to fortify, seasons to rest, and most people lose the war because they're doing the right thing in the wrong season. You can't fight effectively when you're supposed to be healing. You can't rest peacefully when you're supposed to be advancing. You can't fortify positions when you're supposed to be abandoning them for better ground. Winter in the mind looks like depression, feels like death, convinces you nothing will ever grow again. But winter is when roots go deeper, when the superficial dies off so the essential can survive, when you're forced underground to access resources you didn't know existed. Spring in the mind is when thoughts start breaking through soil, when hope returns not as naive optimism but as evidence-based belief, when you see the first signs that your internal season is changing and growth is becoming possible again. Summer is warfare season, when you have the energy and clarity to fight battles you couldn't even face in winter, when you can advance on enemy territory and reclaim ground that was taken from you. Fall is harvest, when you gather the lessons, when you process what you've learned, when you prepare for the next winter by storing up wisdom like provisions. But here's what changes everything about understanding this terrain. You are not the battlefield, you never were, you are the commander, the general, the one who decides which battles to fight and which to ignore. Which thoughts get reinforced and which get starved of attention. Which memories get prime real estate in your consciousness and which get evicted for squatting on sacred ground. The battle is real. The warfare is legitimate. The enemies are numerous and ruthless, but you're not a victim of your mind. You're the authority over it. And the moment you shift from my thoughts control me to I govern my thoughts, the entire war changes. You stop being a casualty and become a strategist. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop letting every thought that pops up have equal weight and start exercising discernment about what deserves your energy and what deserves to be dismissed. The victory isn't in having no battles, it's in knowing which ones are worth fighting and having the discipline to disengage from the ones that just drain you with no strategic value. Now we move from understanding the terrain to actively reclaiming it, from knowing you're in a war to actually winning it. And this requires strategy, discipline, and a level of self-honesty that most people avoid because it's easier to stay occupied than to fight for liberation. The first strategy is this: you have to stop fighting every battle and start choosing your battles, because your mental energy is finite and the enemy knows this. So they send 1,000 small skirmishes to exhaust you so you have nothing left when the real fight comes. Every negative thought doesn't deserve a full military response. Every fear doesn't require a counter-argument. Every anxious prediction doesn't need to be debated into submission. Some thoughts you just let pass through like weather. You acknowledge them without engaging them. You see them without giving them sovereignty over your day. This is the discipline nobody teaches. The power isn't in controlling every thought. It's in choosing which thoughts get your attention, your energy, your belief, because attention is ammunition, and you've been wasting it on battles that don't advance your position. The reclamation of occupied territory in your mind happens one thought at a time, one belief at a time, one pattern at a time, and it's slow, unglamorous work that doesn't feel like victory until you look back and realize how much ground you've taken back. There's territory in your mind right now that's been occupied by other people's voices. Your parents' disappointment, your ex's criticism, your friends' doubt, the society's expectations. And these voices have set up camp so deep in your consciousness that you think they're your own thoughts. You think their assessment of you is reality. You think their limitations on you are your actual ceiling. The strategy here is eviction, not negotiation. You don't dialogue with occupying forces. You don't try to convince them to leave peacefully. You forcefully remove thoughts that don't serve your purpose, and you do it without guilt, without apology, without the false courtesy of entertaining ideas that are actively destroying you. When the thought comes that you're not good enough, you don't argue with it. You don't try to prove it wrong. You just refuse it residency. You say, that's not mine to carry, and you put it down like the dead weight it is. Here's where the seasons of mental warfare become tactical. You have to know when to fight and when to fortify, when to advance and when to defend what you've already gained. There are days when your mental state is strong, your clarity is sharp, your energy is high. These are the days you go on the offensive. You challenge the beliefs that have been limiting you. You confront the fears that have been controlling you. You push into new territory and establish new thought patterns. But there are other days when you're depleted, when the battles have taken their toll, when you're running on empty. These are not the days to start new wars. These are the days you defend what you've already won. You protect the ground you've reclaimed. You rest in the truth you've already established instead of trying to conquer new lies. Most people lose progress because they don't understand this rhythm. They try to fight at full intensity every single day until they burn out and surrender everything back to the enemy, or they rest so long they lose their edge and wake up to find the enemy has recaptured what took months to liberate. The seed buried in darkness doesn't just sit there waiting, it actively breaks through soil. And this is where the analogy gets uncomfortable, because breaking through requires the seed to crack open, to split apart, to destroy its current form, to access its future form. The thoughts you're holding on to right now, the beliefs about yourself that feel so solid, so permanent, so true, some of them have to crack open for growth to happen. Some of them have to die for you to live. Some of them have to be completely destroyed for the real you to break through. You've been watering thoughts that were never meant to grow, beliefs about your inadequacy, fears about your future, stories about your past that keep you planted in pain. The strategy shifts. Stop watering what's killing you and start watering what's trying to live. Starve the thoughts that diminish you by refusing to give them attention. Feed the thoughts that elevate you by meditating on them, rehearsing them, acting on them until they become as automatic as the negative ones used to be. Before I continue, answer one question honestly, and I need you to really sit with this. Let it land in your chest, not just your head. What enemy territory in your mind have you surrendered without even fighting back? What lie about yourself have you accepted as truth without ever challenging it? What limitation have you agreed to that was never actually yours to carry? What voice in your head gets to speak with authority even though it's never been right about you, never seen your full potential, never bet on your capacity to rise? If you can't answer this, you're not paying attention to the war, you're not aware of what you've lost, you're asleep while the enemy ransacks your identity. And if you're still listening, something inside you is waking up, not the part of you that's comfortable with how things are, but the part that remembers you were meant for more than mental slavery, the part that refuses to die quietly, the part that's been waiting for permission to fight back and is realizing permission was never required. Now we build momentum because understanding without action is just sophisticated procrastination, and you didn't come this far to collect information, you came to experience transformation. You win in silence, not because the battle isn't loud, but because the real victories happen in moments nobody sees at 6 a.m. When you choose to get up instead of staying in bed rehearsing your inadequacy in the middle of a panic attack, when you remember your breath and refuse to let fear have the final word, in conversations where you almost people please, but instead you honor your truth, even if it disappoints someone else. You train in silence, building mental muscles in the mundane. Practicing thought discipline when stakes are low so you're ready when everything's on the line. Rehearsing your identity in the mirror before you have to defend it in the world. You conquer in silence, taking back your mind inch by inch, while everyone around you is oblivious to the war you're winning. Reclaiming your peace while they're still surrendering theirs. Establishing sovereignty over your thoughts while they're still letting every opinion and circumstance dictate their mental state. The rhythm continues, building like a war drum. You grow in silence. In the hours you spend processing instead of performing, feeling instead of fleeing, sitting with discomfort instead of numbing it. You heal in silence. Not in the Instagram post about your breakthrough, but in the 2 a.m. moment when you finally forgive yourself for what you couldn't control. When you release the person who hurt you, not because they deserve it, but because you deserve freedom. When you stop performing recovery and actually do the work. You rise in silence. Not with announcements and declarations, but with consistent choices, daily disciplines, private victories that compound into public transformation. The world won't see you winning until you've already won. They won't celebrate your progress until it's so obvious they can't ignore it. And you have to be okay with that. You have to find validation in the work itself, not in the recognition of the work, because external applause for internal battles never comes when you need it most. Identity activation happens here. In this space between understanding and embodiment. You are not your thoughts. You are the awareness of your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You are the one experiencing feelings. You are not the battlefield. You are the commander who decides what happens on that battlefield. This distinction changes everything, because as long as you think you are your anxiety, you'll believe you can't exist without it. But when you realize you are the one experiencing anxiety, you understand you can exist separately from it. You can observe it without being consumed by it. You can acknowledge it without letting it make decisions for you. As long as you think you are your depression, you'll protect it like it's part of your identity. But when you realize you are the one experiencing depression, you can begin to separate yourself from it, to see it as a state you're in, not a self you are, to know that it's passing through you, not defining you. The battle is real, but the victory is inevitable if you stop fighting like a victim and start strategizing like a warrior. And here's the difference. Victims react, warriors respond. Victims are controlled by circumstances, warriors adapt to circumstances. Victims ask, why is this happening to me? Warriors ask, what is this teaching me and how do I use it? You've been in victim mode in your own mind, letting thoughts happen to you, letting feelings control you, letting patterns repeat without intervention. And the shift to warrior mode requires you to take radical responsibility, not for what happened to you, but for what you do with what happened to you. You didn't choose the trauma, but you choose whether it becomes your teacher or your prison. You didn't choose the rejection, but you choose whether it refines you or defines you. You didn't choose the loss, but you choose whether it breaks you open or just breaks you. The manufacturer knows the design, and you were designed for this depth, this pressure, this specific battlefield, because battles reveal what training only suggests. Warfare exposes what peace keeps hidden. And you're learning things about your strength that you never would have known in comfort. The parts of you that are breaking aren't the essential parts, they're the false parts, the performance parts, the parts you constructed to survive that are now dismantling because you're ready to live. What you thought was you falling apart is actually you coming together. The real you assembling from fragments, the authentic you emerging from beneath the rubble of who you pretended to be. And this process is violent and beautiful and necessary, and it happens on a battlefield because that's where true identity is forged, where you discover what you're actually made of, when everything external is stripped away and all that's left is the core of who you are under pressure. You will look back at this moment as the day the war turned, not because everything changed instantly, not because the battle stopped or the enemy retreated, but because this is when you stopped fighting blind and started fighting with vision. When you stopped being a casualty and became a conqueror. When you realized the power to win was always in your hands, but you'd been using it to hold yourself back instead of push yourself forward. 6 months from now, a year from now, you're going to be standing in a version of your life that feels unrecognizable from where you are right now, clear-headed when you used to be clouded, indecisive when you used to second-guess everything, unshakable when you used to collapse at the smallest resistance. The thoughts that torment you today will be distant memories. The fears that control you now will be footnotes in your testimony. The mental chaos that feels permanent will be proof of how far you've come. And when people ask you how you changed, you won't be able to explain it in a way that makes sense. Because transformation on this level doesn't happen through information. It happens through decision. Through the moment you decided you'd rather die fighting than live surrendering. But let me be clear about what victory actually looks like, because it's not what you think. It's not the absence of battle. It's not a mind that never struggles or a life that never challenges you. Victory is waking up every morning and knowing that no matter what thoughts show up, you have the authority to choose which ones get to stay. Victory is the panic attack that used to last hours, now lasting minutes, because you've trained yourself to breathe through it, to remember it's temporary, to refuse to let it write the narrative of your entire day. Victory is the depressive episode that used to keep you in bed for weeks, now being something you move through in days because you've built systems, disciplines, anchors that keep you connected to purpose even when you can't feel it. Victory is not perfection, it's progress. It's the gradual reclamation of your mind, one thought at a time, one belief at a time, one pattern at a time, until you look up and realize you're no longer controlled by the chaos, you're commanding it. Every morning is D-Day. Understand this and let it empower you and not exhaust you. Every single morning you wake up, the invasion begins again. The enemy tries to establish a beachhead in your first thoughts, and you have to storm that beach. You have to fight for your mind before you even get out of bed. Because if you lose the morning, you're fighting uphill all day. The thought that you can't do this, the feeling that nothing will change, the voice that says you're not strong enough, these are the enemy's opening move. And you counter it not with toxic positivity, but with practiced truth. With evidence from your own life that you've survived every bad day so far, that you've overcome before and you'll overcome again, that you're still here, which means you're still in the fight, which means you haven't lost. Every choice is a battle won or lost. Every decision to scroll instead of rest is territory surrendered. Every moment you choose discipline over distraction is ground reclaimed. Every time you speak truth instead of people-pleasing is a declaration of independence from mental slavery. The person who wins their mind wins their life, their relationships, their destiny. Because everything external is a reflection of something internal. Your relationships mirror your relationship with yourself. Your success reflects your belief about what you deserve. Your peace is proportional to your ability to govern your thoughts. You cannot have external order while internal chaos reigns. You cannot build anything lasting in the world while your mind is still burning. You cannot expect others to respect boundaries you don't enforce with your own thoughts. Win the internal war and the external battles become easier. Not because circumstances change, but because you change. Not because life gets softer, but because you get stronger. Not because the enemy stops attacking, but because you stop being surprised by the attacks and start being prepared for them. But hear this warning wrapped in wisdom. The enemy never fully retreats. Vigilance is forever, but so is your strength. You will have days when you thought you'd conquered anxiety, and it shows up like it never left. Moments when you believed you'd healed from rejection, and someone's careless words ripped the wound open again. Seasons when you were sure you'd found your direction, and suddenly you're lost again. This doesn't mean you failed. This means you're human. This means the battle is ongoing. This means you need to stay sharp, stay ready, stay disciplined. Even when you feel like you've won, because the moment you stop defending your mind is the moment the enemy starts planning the next invasion. But you're not the same person you were when this war started. You're not fighting with the same weapons or the same strategy. You've learned the terrain. You've built calluses on your soul. You've developed instincts that protect you before your thoughts can betray you. Your pain was boot camp. Every rejection was target practice. Every failure was tactical training. Every moment you thought would kill you was actually preparing you for battles you didn't even know were coming. The breakdown you experienced wasn't destruction. It was demolition. Tearing down the false structures so something real could be built. Clearing ground that was occupied by lies so truth could take root. And now you're standing in the rubble of who you used to be, surrounded by the debris of old beliefs and dead patterns, and you have a choice. You can mourn what's gone, or you can build what's coming. You can stay in the wreckage, or you can use it as foundation. You can let this battlefield define you as a victim or refine you as a victor. You were built for this war, selected for this battle, designed for this specific kind of pressure, because there's something in you that only activates under attack, a strength that only surfaces when you're forced to fight, a version of you that's been sleeping in peacetime and is finally waking up in warfare. This is your moment, not to wait for rescue, but to become your own rescuer. Not to hope someone saves you, but to realize you've been saving yourself all along. Not to pray for the battle to end, but to step fully into it, knowing that every warrior who ever won their war had moments they wanted to quit, days they thought they couldn't continue, nights they wondered if victory was even possible, and they won anyway. Not because they were special, but because they refused to stay defeated. If this message spoke to your heart, if something in these words resonated with a part of you that's been silenced too long, share it with someone who needs hope today, someone who's fighting their own mental war and doesn't know they're not alone in it. And if you want more messages that grow your soul, that challenge your thinking, that call you higher than comfortable and deeper than convenient, subscribe, because your journey has just begun. The war is long, but you're built for endurance. And there are battles ahead that will require everything you've learned, here and more. But you're ready. You've always been ready. You just needed to remember that the mind is the battlefield and you were always meant to win it.